Hello everybody and welcome to the British Pine. My name is Christoph and today we're recording we're recording my 1,000 subscriber special. I'm so happy we reached that milestone, and it's mostly thanks to the video I did with Dave that got a lot of attention and really swallowed in lots of subscribers from both his and my channel, and that was really helpful. By far the most viewed video I ever made. So really nice, and also it gave me the few subscribers I needed to cross the 1,000 mark. I'm going to do a bit of a more fun video today, just talking about some of the mistakes I made when I joined in the Best Brew Challenge that I did last year, where I got this t-shirt from. That's pretty much all I got because I handed in a beer that was quite faulty, and it's just a funny story, I think. So the beer style from last year's Best Brew Challenge was oatmeal stout, and I had recorded a video where I ranted about the fact that oatmeal stout and oat malt stout are actually two different styles, and that is absolutely not comparable, and I hate that they're both grouped together, but even historians like Ron Patterson group them together just for the reason that they are very related. But oat malt stout is the one that is actually containing lots of oat malt. Reinheitsgebots conform, that's why Best Malts chose it like that. They are demanding for the usage of their own oat malt, which is quite nice, without spells or hulls. So it's actually something that you can use quite easily, but you need to add some rice hulls to get everything in the mash going. And then oatmeal stout is the fake advertising stuff, the nutritious stout that was, or nourishing stout, that was done just for advertising and had actually almost no oats in it. So I brewed an oat malt stout. I brewed it with 50% oat malt, which is something I've done before and something I'm quite comfortable with most times. Then 6% of chocolate malt, which is something I like to do for a good rounded chocolate flavor. And then 3% caramel malt, which is a malt that gives a bit of a sweetish flavor, which I thought would be quite useful. I adjusted the water to give plenty of chloride, something sweetish, a bit of sulfate as well, so this is quite, I would say, more balanced than some other beers. Yeah, and then the thing is, I don't want to spoil too much, so let's pour it first, and we'll see what all the problems are, because there's quite a list. So first of all, this one overcarbonated, so I will have to be really careful in how I pour this one. Let's see. Not too bad. It was 4 weeks in the fridge now, so that's fine. It tries to come out of the bottle though. So when we look at the recipe, except for the malt and water, which I already told you, we have to look at it actually quite a bit backwards. So I wanted to use the Wyeast 1469 West Yorkshire Ale. I didn't have it at hand, but I had propagated the yeast from the sediment of a bottle of Thornbridge's Best Bitter, which is called Lord Marple's, because I know that their house yeast is pretty much Timothy Taylor's house yeast. So I was just going to use that because it was standing around in a starter, really freshly prepared, and I thought, let's just use that. Easy thing. Clarified quite nicely, it's a very strongly fluctuating yeast. The beer is also quite old now, so it will have help with that. It's quite a good lagering. You will see that the foam is nice and stable, though it becomes quite coarse now, because it is not that stable, but quite stable. And yeah, so apparently it kept attenuating in the bottle after a few weeks, so it started a bit of more fermentation, which I wasn't expecting. So that's why it's overcarbonated. It is okay-ish on the edge of what you can accept. It's like a wheat beer, definitely out of style, but it is also one of the reasons why the foam stays so stable, because you have all the CO2 that keeps going up and creating new bubbles when the old bubbles burst. So it looks like a stable foam, even though the foam itself is not that stable, because the CO2 helps. Now, on my score sheet, which unfortunately I chucked away pretty quickly after I received it, I got perfect marks for carbonation and foam stability, which I find just hilarious, because the foam stability, as I said, is not good if you compare it normalized to the carbonation. So you really want to see how long is it at a fixed carbonation and not take the carbonation into it. And then the carbonation itself is so much too high. For a stout of this style, I would say 3.5 to 4 grams per liter, and this is definitely 6 to 7, maybe even more. So as I said, this was in the fridge for a long time, and even though it was trying to come out of the bottle. So yeah, definitely overcarved. Funny that I got good marks for that. Then we come to the smell. This is actually quite acceptable now. Now what happened is, because I wanted to do a step mash, which I didn't have to, I wanted to mash it at 45 degrees to get some of the oats, to basically dissolve better. So at 45 degrees you reduce the beta-glucans, the cell membranes get broken down, the starch is more accessible. And that really helps with oats, and especially oat malt. So that's what I did. 10 minutes 45 degrees, then 50 minutes at 57 degrees because I wanted to get it clear. And then 1 hour at 66 degrees. And I did notice in the end that I had slightly burnt my mash during that. Grain bills with oat malt are notorious for burning easily because there's just so much going on and it's so viscous. So anything that gets in contact with the hot surface burns easily. And so I was hoping maybe there's just no burnt smell going in there. And when I tasted it after 2 or 3 weeks, I was convinced it's just a bit roasty from the roast malt. And then a few weeks later, I brought it to my homebrew club, and they all said, "Oh, that's a really bizarre roastiness in there." And I was like, "Oh my god, it smells like burnt mash." But at that time, I had already sent it on its way. Yeah, so I couldn't really do much about that. In the flavor, I got quite low marks. I think 2 out of 5, because they noticed some phenolic, strange burnt off flavor, maybe smoky. They couldn't quite place it, but I know it was definitely the burnt flavor. I think it's mostly gone now, so maybe it's just a lagering problem. So I'm gonna try it in a second. I hopped it with East Kent Golding, so that's quite standard. 34 IBUs. I had measured 84% attenuation, and I think it went on up to 90. So if I remember right, there's also a sour flavor in it now, but I don't think it was there at the very beginning, because I make quite a sweetish beer, so that's why. And fermented at 20 degrees. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, it is quite sour, but not too much, just a slight tartness. Just a bit over attenuated, or created too much organic acid that the low amount of hydrogen carbonate couldn't compensate. Oh yeah, that's the second mistake I made. No, the third one. So first the yeast, then the burnt mash. Third mistake is I over adjusted my water, so the hydrogen carbonate is just 40, just because I had the wrong number in my head on what is the minimum necessary for stout, and you really want to go with something like 100, because roasted malts impart quite a lot of acid or sour flavor. And to counter that, you need some hydrogen carbonate, first of all, to get a good mash pH, which I think was okay with the way I did it, otherwise it wouldn't have worked. And you want to have it there to buffer anything that happens later with sourness that comes from the yeast acids and so on, organic acids. So I didn't do that properly, and that is why the sourness, which might just be okay, not a sour beer, just normal yeast processes, it's just over noticeable. And that's not fitting for a stout. And I have complained often that there's a problem with how many brewers, especially in Germany, brew stouts, because they're always over sour. They have an astringency that is sourish at the end. Actually, this beer, I just noticed, I thought it was quite black, but it's actually just a dark brown, so that's quite nice. So the last thing that I want to criticize is actually quite a difficult thing. So for the color, I got 1 out of 5 points. And there are 2 possibilities. So first of all, in this thin part here of the glass, it looks dark brown. So I would say this is 100 EBC and more. 110 maybe. It doesn't look black, so it's definitely not 150 like Guinness, which you get with 10% roasted malt. So I have 6%, so it's, I would say, around 100. Now, 1 out of 5 marks is really, really, really strange, because it is dark. So either they think mine is too pale, which is possible, and I would think highly of best malts if that was the case. But there is another thing. If you look at the BJCP guidelines, and this competition is judged following the BJCP guidelines, you will see that they say that the color for stout should be 40 to 80 EBC. And that is for all the stouts. Imperial Stout, Oatmeal Stout, Extra Stout, and Tropical Stout, I think. So these are all 40 to 80 EBC. Now, how the hell is that possible, you might wonder? And I have an idea. Color calculators for beer weren't really good in the 90s, and they all gave about half the color that you actually would get in the beer. So you had a lot of difficulties getting above 80. You would, with the blackest of grain builds, you would get to maybe 90 or potentially 100, but it would saturate there. Even when the real color of the beer would be 180. So much, much more. And so either they're actually saying this is too pale, which I don't think it's too pale. It is quite pale, but then the guidelines say it should be quite pale. So the other thing could be that they're actually taking the guidelines literal and thinking that the 80 EBC in actual color, not in wrong calculator color, is the limit. And that would be just hilarious. So there's another competition happening this year in Germany from a homebrew club in the town near where I live, that will do also quite a few stouts and then also black IPA, I think. Can only recommend you to participate there, because what the BJCP judges really can do is find off flavors, so that's really nice. They notice the burnt stuff, and in some of my other brews they usually say that I have too much ethyl acetate, which is the pear flavor, and they say it's too much because apparently it goes towards solvent. I have never noticed solvent flavor, and I have had brewers checking these and they didn't notice it either. But these BJCP judges are really, really good in detecting these off flavors, so I have to take that seriously. So I asked that homebrew club, what am I supposed to do when the guidelines say maximum of 80 EBC? Yeah, and they just said they're not going to tell the judges what to do. The judges can judge themselves. I'm really curious and looking forward to that. I'm going to do a stout that is a bit similar, but so also I like these 6% chocolate malt, maybe a bit more if I want to get it darker. I want to go for a proper dark color. Something around 150 EBC. Actually here I calculated the color, didn't I? Oh yeah. So this one is actually 81 EBC because I wanted to adhere to the guidelines, I think. So maybe it is really just too pale, and that's why I got the bad value. That would be hilarious, you know, getting wrong marks because you followed the guidelines that the competition follows. I just find that so stupid. Yeah, so I'm going to go for a really dark stout, and I see that I can do this really nice. The 6% chocolate malt, by the way, is what Burton Bridge uses for their Top Dog stout. So there's a commercial example that uses, I think, 6.5 and not 6%, but very similar. And I still think it's all bonkers, the way this is all going. Yeah, just don't understand it. Okay, so that would be my little rant and funny storytelling. At least I got the t-shirt out of the competition, so yay me, I guess. And the beer now, after 3/4 of a year, almost 1 year, is actually tasting almost decent. You can almost drink it. This is the penultimate bottle, so I still have one left. Just couldn't drink it much, and I didn't have much. But yeah, such is life. Okay, so thank you so much, everybody, for 1,000 subscribers. I'm really thankful about how the channel progresses, even with the small pace that I have in making videos, and, you know, just life in general goes on, and I have not much time. Though I do brew quite a lot, for example, for the homebrew convention that was in the beginning of this year, which where I did a Red Berry New England IPA, which might be the next video that is coming up. And then I would say, see you next time, and bye-bye.